In this video, you're going to learn a simple technique learned from roguelikes that you can use to get attention no matter your genre. So if you're a small indie game dev and you're not making a roguelike or a roguelite, then here's a simple reason why more and more players want to play roguelikes. And then after learning this reason, you'll get a step-by-step guide on how to use the same technique to find players no matter what genre you're in. Okay, so here's what to do. So in this section, I want to talk about why roguelikes sell so many games and what you can do about it if you're in a different genre. So for the longest time, to get variety and replayability in a game meant that you would have to play, 100 hours of a game. Of course, there were games that were shorter that, had replayability, but for the most part, longer games offered players, variety and more replayability. So for example, marketing terms like open world, 4X, procedurally generated, choice and consequence, branching paths, all these terms promise the same thing, variety and replayability. But slowly players got tired of putting in so many hours, going through multiple playthroughs just to get that variety and replayability. And, marketing terms like open world and procedurally generated no longer were appealing to certain gamers, right? So slowly, this problem of working so hard to get, replayability began nagging on players, and this problem started to surface to the consciousness of millions of gamers. So then here come roguelikes to solve a huge problem in gaming. Roguelikes allow players that, want variety and curiosity and replayability, but offer them that faster, easier, and in a shorter time. So no longer players had to, slog through hours of a game and play through it multiple times to get that constant surprise and always see new stuff right away. They got that stuff faster and easier through roguelikes. So, of course, there are still a lot of gamers that don't mind, these longer games. And of course, there's always games that let players experience variety in a short time. But here's why all of a sudden, the marketing term roguelike or roguelite is selling a lot of video games. So in this section, I want to talk about why it takes a while for marketing terms to work and grab attention. So in a market, awareness takes a long time to develop. So for example, marketing terms, like I said, open world, choice and consequence, procedurally generated, all these terms tell the player, right away what to expect in a game. But before these terms meant anything, it took years for these terms to clearly tell the player what they mean. So for example, there have always been, free roaming open world games since the 70s and 80s, right? But it wasn't until, Grand Theft Auto around 2001 that the term really meant something. And then even still, it took another decade for this, term to solidify. So now that when I say open world, you know exactly what I mean. But back then, it wasn't as solid, right? It didn't have that concrete meaning. And that's why the term roguelike is so popular all of a sudden. This term took a long time to solidify and make clear exactly what the player will get. And when, the player sees the term now, they know exactly what they'll be getting, basically surprises and replayability in a short time with less effort. Again, this term took years to surface to the top of millions of players' consciousness, but once that term hit, the surface of awareness, and now that players can clearly understand what they're going to get, and then, boom, all of a sudden there's a mass desire to play games that use that term because that term is now solidified in the consciousness of, gamers. And of course, as more games flood, the roguelike market, new problems and new frustrations will arise, and the term roguelike or even roguelite will start feeling old and stale to gamers, right? And then when that happens, gamers will start looking for new, fresh games that solve their new problem. But for now, this term is still used in a lot of marketing because it does get attention. Okay, now let's take what you just learned so you can use it to your advantage to grab attention. And let's use these, insights to help you find players even if you're not making a roguelike. So in this section, I want to talk about how to use this lesson to help you get attention. So remember, the reason why players love roguelikes is because that term promises them replayability, surprises, curiosity in short bursts in short time. But how does this translate to your game? Does this mean you have to make, a game that offers replayability in a short time? No. The idea here is to use the fundamental principles you just learned and implement it into your own game. So let's do that. Let's use those fundamental principles to help your game get more attention, even if you're not a roguelike. So here's exactly how. Okay, so in step one, let's figure out what core desire your game is fulfilling. There are many different desires that certain games fulfill. So for example, like I said, roguelikes fulfill the desire for replayability and surprises in one sitting in a short time. And players don't have to spend, weeks or months playing a game to fulfill that desire for that replayability. Now, your game fulfills a different desire. So your first job is to figure this out. And it might seem very difficult at first, but it's actually pretty easy. So for example, think about your car. What is the basic fundamental desire that your car fulfills? Well, it basically allows you to get from one place to another quickly, right? Okay, now let's use that same principle to your game. What's the basic desire your game fulfills? So to help you answer this, here's 3 examples. what's the basic desire that a top-down shooter game fulfills? Well, because, of this top-down perspective, it allows the gamer to see, the entire map and they know what's going on. So, because some people, desire shooting games where they get to observe not just what's in front of them, but also they want to see the entire field or the map. Okay, next example. What's the basic desire that, puzzle games fulfill? Well, puzzle games let the player turn, chaos into order, and it allows them to try to solve problems without too much risk and trial and error. And it also allows them to feel good after working on a problem and finally getting that, aha moment. Okay, next example. What does a narrative game do? Well, it lets the gamer experience a story. It allows them to be fully immersed into the story as if they were writing the story themselves, and because they were controlling that main character in a way, right? So now let's look at your game. What's the very basic thing your game does? And if you're still stuck, then think of the main action verb the player gets to do in your game. So for example, shoot, stealth, read, solve, hunt, survive, so there's one action verb that your player gets to do in your game. So come up with that to help you get started with this question. Okay, here's step 2. In what way is your game fulfilling that core desire? Okay, now that you have the core desire your game is fulfilling, let's figure out how your game fulfills that need. So again, look at your car. It basically takes you place to place, right? But how does it do it, right? Well, it can take you there as fast as possible, or as safely as possible, or as fuel efficient as possible, right? There's different ways how you get to place using your car, right? So it's the same thing with a top-down shooter, right? How does the game let the player know what's going on in the map? Because that's their number one desire. They want to see the whole map in front of them, right? Well, games like Hotline Miami, because the game is so fast-paced, the player has to assess the map quickly and think on their feet and make decisions really fast. But a game like, Door Kickers, because it's more slow-paced, the player takes a more tactical, thoughtful approach to assess the map and decide what to do. So again, the desire is to, see the map in one spot, in one sitting, but how you do that depends on what the player wants, right? Some people want fast-paced, some people want slow-paced tactical. Or let's look at the puzzle game. People love solving problems and getting that feeling, that aha moment once they discover the solution to a puzzle, right? But how they do that depends on what they like. So for example, games like The Witness or Cocoon, they use a lock and key method where there's only one way to solve a puzzle, right? Or there's games like Mozzolina where there's a lot of different tools you use to solve the puzzle, and there's not just one way to solve a puzzle. You have to kind of come up with a solution yourself using your environment and all the tools you got. So again, people want to solve puzzles, they want to get that aha moment, but how they solve that puzzle depends on, who they are or what they like. So now look at your core desire your game is fulfilling, so step 1, and then answer how your game fulfills that desire. So to help you answer this, take your action verb you came up with in step 1, and then explain how, in what way your player accomplishes that action. So for example, the action verb you came up with is survive, right? But how do they survive? Again, the idea here is to figure out not just the core desire, but also how that person is fulfilling that core desire, using your mechanisms and using your features to help them accomplish, what they want to fulfill in the game. Okay, so here's step 3. In what new way is your game fulfilling that desire? So the key to getting attention isn't to copy what is working for other games, right? And do that. And it's not taking what other games are doing and try to innovate on it. The key is to figure out how your game is fulfilling a player's desire in a new way. And the reason you're doing all of this stuff is because when the player lands on your Steam page or, a post you put on Reddit or whatever, you want them to say, oh, cool, I haven't seen this before. If you can get a player to feel that when they see your game, then they're going to be motivated to wishlist or even, buy your game. And this is where I'm going to challenge you. This won't be easy, and it'll take a few days to figure this out. So look at step 2, and then now I want you to figure out how your game is fulfilling that core desire in a new way that most games aren't in your genre. And some devs think that their game isn't that unique. But again, I challenge you, the more you think this over and give it some time, maybe go for a few walks or even in the shower, the answer will pop in your head. So let me give you an example of what I'm talking about here, right? Say I was making a top-down tactical shooter like, Door Kickers. Well, my core desire I'm fulfilling is it allows the player to see the entire map. And then how I'm letting them fulfill that desire is through slow-paced, thoughtful, tactical gameplay. But if I just stop there, then I'm not going to get attention. I'm not going to get that, oh, cool, I haven't seen that before, feeling. And that's because I'm doing what other games have done. And people get bored playing, copycat games. They always want new ways, new fresh ways to fill, their desires. So I need to add something new and fresh. So maybe make it a one shot, one kill kind of game, right? Or instead of a military theme, I'd use a high fantasy theme. So the idea here is to make sure you're not copying what other games are doing and kind of discover your own unique, hook of your game. And I know there's something unique about your game, and that's your challenge, right? To try to figure out how your game is fulfilling a desire in a new way. And I say this because that's what roguelikes are doing. They are fulfilling a player's need for replayability and constant surprises in a new way. And the new way is that, the players don't have to slog through a 100-hour campaign to get that replayability. They can get that replayability faster, easier, and less time and with less boredom. So this is why this step is very important. I want you to uncover the problem your genre or your market has. And to do that, you need to figure out how your game lets a player fulfill their core desire in a new and fresh way. And I know it's not easy. It will take a few days for you to figure this out, but spend some time, brainstorming, then take a break, and then try again. And after some work, you will come up with how your game fulfills a player's desire in a new way. But we're not done yet. So here's step 4. Create a core message, or for example, an elevator pitch using your game's uniqueness. So the goal of these steps is to help you discover what makes your game unique, help you discover that unique hook and why it's different from other games. And once you do, you then need to communicate your uniqueness in a way that clearly tells the player how your game is new and fresh. So to do that, you need to create an elevator pitch, or what I call, a core message. And this is a short sentence that tells a player what desire you're fulfilling and how you're doing it in a new and fresh way. So for example, millions of people love the game, poker, but Balatro took that, mass desire, to play poker and added a fresh new way to fulfill that desire. And the core pitch, the core message was really simple. It basically said the poker roguelike. And this simple core message is attention grabbing because a player can easily imagine what a poker roguelike would mean. They don't even have to, play the game to understand what they'll be doing in the game. It's the same thing with your game, right? By looking at your game's core desire, it fulfills, and then figuring out how your game fulfills those desires in new ways, then you can begin to craft a simple, clear marketing message that will cut through all the noise, especially when you're, a small indie game dev. Again, you want to create a short, clear message that will make the person go, oh, cool, I haven't seen that before. So to help you work on this, answer these 2 questions. What does your game do? So basically, this is what you did in step 1 and step 2. And then in what new way does your game deliver what it does? So you worked on this in step 3. So for example, let's say I'm making, that top-down shooter. If I just say this simple message, a top-down tactical shooter, it's not going to get attention because there's a lot of games doing that, right? But if I say a high fantasy top-down tactical shooter where you get 1 shot, 1 kill, well, that's going to get more attention because that's pretty unique and it's offering something new. Okay, let's move on to step 5, and that is every marketing message you create needs to revolve around your core message. So now that you've come up with your core message in step 4, you need to craft marketing messages that amplify that pitch. So for example, if you go to Balatro's Steam page, it basically takes their simple elevator pitch, their core message, basically the poker roguelike, and then it unpacks it with more detail. It talks about poker mechanics, it talks about the roguelike mechanics, and it talks about how adding roguelike mechanics to a poker game makes this game more fun and replayable. But again, all the marketing copy on that Steam page directly links back or lines back up with their simple core message, the poker roguelike. And this works because your core message is what grabs attention. It's what, stops the player and makes them curious about your game. And once somebody's curious about something, they want to look for or search for a payoff. So it kind of goes like this. Oh, I'm curious, but okay, now show me more. Show me why this is cool and why it's not boring, right? That's kind of what's going through their head because once you're curious, you still want a payoff. You want to follow through with that curiosity and, learn some more. So that's why I say every content you make about your game, always have that core message in the back of your mind and always line it back up to that core message. So for example, say I'm making a top-down high fantasy 1 shot, 1 kill tactical shooter, right? And I've updated the sound design. So then I want to post this update on my Steam community hub. But instead of just talking about technical boring stuff, I would talk about how this new cool gun reload sound effect adds more crunch and more immersion to the 1 shot, 1 kill mechanic. And then I show these sound effects, before and after. Again, always have your core message, your elevator pitch in mind when you're creating any content about your game, and then always line it back up to that core message. Why? Because again, your core message is what differentiates your game from other games. It's what will help you get, attention because of that curiosity. And if you don't clearly communicate your core message any chance you get, then getting attention will be hard because you'll just sound like all the other hundreds or thousands of games, talking about the same thing. And the player won't know the difference between your game or another game, even though it might be different. And I know this stuff isn't easy and I'm throwing a lot of stuff at you. So if you're stuck, feel free to email me or send a message below and I'll help you the best I can. And if you made it this far and you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. That helps a lot. Again, my name is Dariusz. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And I hope you got at least one good idea to help you find players for your indie game. Good luck with game dev, and I'll talk to you soon. Later.